didn't watch Breaking Bad, but I've watched other shows, obviously, and that was a big influence.
I can't believe it.
Shun me now, I'm leaving.
It's okay. I haven't seen it either.
Oh, God.
I haven't ever watched. Well, I tried watching. I say tried, and people are going to get mad. I tried watching Sons of Anarchy.
Yeah, I never watched it either.
Okay, good. I'm not the only one.
That's like one of the best ones that I actually did watch. Like all those ones, everyone's like, you need to watch it. Like that's the only one I got through. And it's only because after you get a certain of the way through, you're like, I'm gonna watch this because this person better die or I'm gonna kill it. Like it's like, so I watched it to the end just to make sure it happened. Like,
that's some dedication.
Breaking Bad was one of the only shows that I've watched that hooked me in the first episode.
Wow, really?
The first 5 minutes of an episode.
Oh yeah, that was a great. I've seen chunks of it. I got
amazing.
4 episodes of it, but yeah, it's just I couldn't keep going.
Yeah, so there's a story that's in our video game that's kind of like influenced by Breaking Bad. What?
Influenced.
Yeah, but there's more than superheroes. What would you say?
It's drawing the influences is you really, finding that I think is really big with TV shows. Well, and what, Young Wavy the artist?
Yes.
What would you say makes a good protagonist? What do you guys think?
I think really it's how to do the human element really well. If you have, like, again, particularly in something like horror, because it's what we're writing, if you don't have at least the person who you see in the first few panels who you know is going to live, be on a very relatable human level. If you don't have them written in that vein, then naturally you're just going to be waiting until page 2 when you know they're going to get their head blown off or something. And I think that does go across everything with really good comics. In particular, to kind of reference, like you look at something like Lock and Key. For those who have read it, it's like everyone's like, yeah. Like the reason it works so well with having kids as protagonists is because they're relatable. And I think one thing I know from my books is when I'm trying to pick a starting point for something, and I've got a couple of stories down the line where I was really trying to hash out this idea of like, how do you get people into it and make this person really important? I think for anything, the protagonist has to be the most relatable. You have to try and get across on the page and in the word that this struggle that they're going through, you probably have gone through something slightly similar.
It's rare that like Superman's a favorite hero. You know what I mean? Like typically Superman's not someone's favorite hero because he's not really relatable.
Care less about Superman.
But that's why they try to make him more relatable.
That's why they start taking away his powers, and then he needed the sun to recharge everything, and it was just like, so he's going to go on a road trip to boost his batteries. It was stupid. But guess I'm never getting a job somewhere. But like part of the reason why the likes of someone like Spiderman works, for example, is the fact that he was a teenager who was bullied, who was a slight outcast. There were some people who he kind of related to and worked well with, and there was others who didn't. And he was in the situation. And I think everyone, in particular maybe in the comics community, I don't know if this is for everyone, but when you start opening up to people initially when you're younger that you're reading comics, you do feel slightly ostracized, because comics isn't... Well, it's changing, obviously, but it wasn't initially seen as this whole thing of like high-end art and literature, even though it's probably the most accessible art form for everybody on the planet. I think, and that's one of the reasons why I love comic books so much, because it's literally it's art you're in control of, as opposed to like walking into a gallery, which is a really intimidating space, where there's people who are like, oh yes, this singular line on the wall means so much. But it's like, yeah, it means a lot to the person who sat there for all of 5 minutes to write the blurb on why they decided they couldn't be bothered. But when you have a character like that, and the young Wavy, it says it there that he would say Spider-Man is a good example because he is, because it's the relatability. That's why people care so much about him even now. Whereas like that with someone like Superman, nobody does really care, because at the end of the day, you can't really do much to him. So like if we're all writing these characters and bringing in this kind of weird fiction genres into this new vein and normal, we still have to think about how do we make our people relatable, because the only way you really pick up a book is if you see something either in one word bubble or in the first panel that you're like, okay, I know what they're going through.
Yeah, I normally do that not just through action, but I also do it through the thinking, the thought boxes. I go through the character's inner monologue to say, okay, what are they thinking, and also how do we relate to them in that. I often use humor in there because that just breaks the barrier, but also shows, okay, this is a person who really cares about not dying, first of all. And second of all, he's, just like, okay, trying to take off the mind that people are trying to kill him. So that's how I tackle that.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Is like you're exploring. You got to explore the character more. I think it's not just he looks cool. And this is the last panel we had was that I was on was character building, and that was a big part that we talked about. Was a good protagonist, a good character isn't one that just looks cool. It's they're interesting and they just happen to look cool or something like that. And that, I think that's really what I've taken to heart, is that like a good protagonist is a good story, is someone who is a good story. It's not only they are in a good story, but their story is interesting. And that's like for my comics, Henry Graves is a paranormal investigator set in like an alternate early 1900s. And the problem I had with him was that like my first story, he's just very two-dimensional. He's kind of a cardboard cutout. And the next story I worked on with him, you're starting to dive a little bit more into his past. And the story I'm writing now, he goes through this excessive trauma. You learn about what really happened in his past, what just happened, how he's perceived by the city he lives in. And like, that's why I think by the time I got to this story, it started to be much more interesting. And that's the coolest thing about, I think, indie comics, for one thing, is that I can just start, I don't have to sit here and write it all out and then try to pitch it to someone. I can just make it and feel out what I need to do. And then by the time I get to this like third installment, it's like, okay, this is really what I should have started with. But you have to kind of feel it out, and it's essentially as a draft. And so I think the take home is a good protagonist is someone that you can relate, like you said, relatable character, relate to their story, and their story is interesting. It's not just, like I said, they're not just cool, but they have depth. Yeah.
Well, I think it's just that just kind of keep going with that a little bit. Like, so when I was writing Within the Woods, the one of the main reasons I kind of got inspired to do the book is twofold: is where I grew up and the fact that I just moved in with my now fiance, and so I kind of wanted to write a book that was for her and kind of about her and things like that. But I also wanted it to be a horror, which she wasn't massively fond of at the time. And so I went with the idea of, okay, how would I feel if we're in this big old bubble of everything's brilliant, yeah, we got our first place together, all this type of jazz. What happened if I lost her? And instead of it, and then while I was kind of writing that and everything like that, I was kind of looking at going, it's not really that much about her if she's not in it because she's gone. So I don't know if you've seen, the first Silent Hill movie, which I like it. I watch it a lot still to this day. But in the interviews with the director, was Christopher Gans, he was saying that like he looked at the first game and everything. You have this character Harry Mason, but when you really boil it down, it's what Harry Mason's going through is literally the same thing a mother would do. So that's why he swapped that kind of gender of a thing, and so we brought it down to that. Myself and my first Jessica actually went into the woods. So like all of that book is actually set in the woods that I used to go up and hang around in, and looked at it, and I kind of said to her, right, what you're going to do is you're basically going to go looking for me. And like, and I think I mentioned on the first time I ever did one of the podcasts where it was like, what would happen now if I left you here and you felt this desperate need to find me because you've never been here? And so we start bringing the story back around to that then as well. And not only this is how I would feel if I lost her, but now I really know how she would feel if she lost me, and just bring it to that. It's very human emotions, and emotions that we kind of experience all the time, which hopefully that gets across on the page. And also, yeah, beard gang. There's only one of us that doesn't have a beard, my man.
Yeah, it's true. That's true.
Makes me sick.
Get him out of here.
Just get a Sharpie, just a little soul patch, something.
I mean, nothing at all, though.
I don't like facial hair on my head, on my face, on my head.
On my head.
Yeah, I don't have much facial hair on my head.
Well, Dylan, I really did with that story. It's like you really like. To me, it's just like the first thing I react to is like how much thought and care and concepts went into just coming up with a story idea like that, and like and really, and I think that's really a big thing is like if you're gonna do a comic and you're gonna do something unique, it's like your heart and soul goes into it. I'm not saying you have to do that for everything you create, but you really do create a very unique piece of work when you have that much like behind the scenes in-depth thought going into it, and like rather than just how would I feel about it? Oh, well, this, and you just kind of write it. It's like if you actually experience it, you go do something. It's like that next level. You're starting to get deeper and dig deeper into the story or the idea of the story.
Yeah, well, but that's kind of the thought process with pretty much all of them. So now we do have a book, Nightlands, where it's a little bit. A lot of that didn't happen, but the research that Ben, one of the writers of the book, did for that was PhD level, like crazy amounts. Myself and Shane, the other writer on that, kind of no, this idea, we're going to go completely left field with everything we've done now. I'm just throwing it out here. This is the pitch. No, we're not going to work on it. Don't worry about it. This will be fine. And it was like that. So we had this idea for this mad fantastical thing, and then someone said, well, no, what's worked previously is the relatability and the research and the knowledge. And so with Lady of the River, which is now on the SeerNova Comics platform because it's been about 40 minutes since a plug. Come on. That at its core is actually about bullying and the idea of trying to get away from that feeling of if you are the person who is being bullied, which I know I've experienced in my life. I know a lot of people experience in their life on a daily basis, regardless of what age you are. So how do you an outlet for that is that better cliffhangers. Go on.
Well, I would say that you'd have to put your protagonist in a very difficult position to be in to have a very good cliffhanger. Now, it could be anything from, in the horror comic, the monster coming in, right behind him, looking out of the shadows. It could be that. Or in my case, what I did for Codename Hunter at SeerNova Comics platform. What I did was in issue 2, I had this cyborg, standing over my hero with a laser cannon getting ready to fire. So it has to be something dramatic. It has something, that will leave people thinking, is he going to die in this issue? Is he going to die in the next? What's going to happen? And you can even do this in the cover. You can even hint at take that image and put it on the cover and say, okay, something crazy might happen in this issue.
Yeah, the other thing too you can do is dirt throughout the comic. Like that's something Greg and I try to do. Is we try to make it so that the bottom right panel of the right page is also just suspenseful. So it's building suspense the whole time because it makes you want to flip the page. You're like, oh my God, what's about to happen, right? So even all the way up until potentially if you leave your comic on a cliffhanger, then you have it so that the whole time it's been building suspense so that the cliffhanger is even more dramatic.
Yeah, no, that's actually very much kind of similar to what I was going to talk about was like, it has to be earned. The cliffhanger can't just kind of come out of left field, usually. There's exceptions to the rule, of course, but I think that's the biggest
thing. A hand grenade.
Yeah, I have a hand grenade. I'm going to blow it up. The end, or question mark. I think that's a very common mistake I see is like, you know your story so well, in and out. So you understand what this means. But if you don't work hard enough to make the reader understand it, it means nothing. The cliffhanger is pointless. And so it's like making sure that if your notes are the supplement to make the story better, then you should include this information in the story. The readers aren't going to be able to read that. So like I said, you have to earn the cliffhanger. And it's kind of like building up from, all the page turn cliffhangers or suspense is through the story. If you understand how important, like if you know that bad guy, or if someone, like it's that whole dramatic irony where one of them is a bad guy, like one of the survivors is really a bad guy, but no one else knows, but the reader knows. And then all of a sudden you see something like the cliffhanger ends and the reader's well aware that this bad guy did something and we all know it. And so it's like, it's very drama filled. It's really hyper. Yes, exactly. It's. I think that's the best advice I have is make that cliffhanger earned and build it up through the whole story. And when you hit that stride just right, that cliffhanger can be just so enticing to the reader.
Yes.
I guess that's to like just add one more thing to it is like it's the same idea of treating it like a payoff. It's a setup and a payoff. If you have a payoff with no setup, there's nothing earned. So it's like if you look at it that way, I guess that's another way to be able to relate to it is make sure there's a setup for payoffs, make sure there's payoffs for setups, one way or another.
Yes.
I agree.
I concur.
You can find cliffhangers on the SeerNova platform.
Well, something, not to keep talking, I'm sorry, but something I was thinking of was like finding inspirations and whatnot, was that out of the blue this year, I made a comic called Chicago 20 on the SeerNova website. That it really was not in my plans. I had plans for a lot of different stories, and this one kind of came out of the blue, but it's because I went to, at the beginning of this year, before the world decided to end, I went to the Chicago Comic-Con, first time I'd ever been there, and I went with a group of people, and we stayed the whole weekend, and everyone that stayed together, like at our friend's house, was all, a fine artist, or a comic artist, or writers, or it was just a big group of creative people, and it was the best, like, most influential part of my year as far as like getting me to work on stuff and really be a part of a community. And I ended up writing a comic based off it, but decided like, hey, what if this group of robots who all live in different parts of the world all come to Chicago that has like an orbital elevator and it's all sci-fi, there's hover cars and stuff. And so it's essentially, I wrote out my entire weekend, turned it into a sci-fi story, and then just kind of put my like feelings and thoughts into it and then made it like into a short story. And it's not superhero. It's a weird sci-fi, fun little adventure, and it's just a one-off. And so you can find inspirations like off of those like events, those big events that happen in your life, friends or family, and it's amazing how far that'll go.
I was gonna say, it kind of reminds me of, I don't remember the show, but there's like some show where like there's these kids that are chatting, there's a scary version of this, but there's also a normal one. I do not remember what it's called, but basically they're chatting and then they start talking about a story, and then they're in the story. You know what I mean? Like they're talking about how, oh, wouldn't it be cool if we had like spaceships and all of a sudden like they're in a spaceship. It's like that's what that reminded me of.
Kind of driving that, like, well, it's think back to when you're a kid. If you were a imaginative kid, that would always think of like my cousin and I would always get together and we would think of vampire stories and run around the woods and or think we're in a spaceship. It was we're age 5 to 12, somewhere in there, and every time we came up with a fun little story, and those things are all inspirations to me that I can still draw from to this day.
So we used to go off the woods and kill people we thought were sucking blood.
But I think it's really, again, to bring it back to the idea that there's more than superheroes. So it's like that. You had a weekend, it inspired you to go off this thing, and I think one of the hardest jumping off points for me when I decided to do a comic book was like, where do you begin? And I think, like, say for example, like that, like if you've ever picked up an instrument and another friend of yours had it, we have all had the conversation with our friends where we're like, we should start a band. And like, even something as simple as that, it is, yeah, literally, like you're listening to Megadeth, and you can't play a single thing, but you're going to form the band.
You're already a star.
Like, so what about the idea of, if you write a paragraph about when it worked, like you formed the band, it was like Bill and Ted, it was amazing, and then write another paragraph about how it didn't work, and 90% of you are on heroin or something, like just something like that. Not maybe don't do that research, but
do it at work.
But even just something like that, so the negative one is, right, it didn't work out, none of you talk anymore, and then it's about bringing back that friendship and that kind of brotherhood or sisterhood or whatever you want to call it. It doesn't particularly matter, but there you have a story. You don't necessarily have to be able to draw it. Like I, for one, tell you straight off, like the first Nightlands, the first time I drew it was actually in a zine style. Not that the one that's out is much improvement, but it's far better than originally, but at least I put it out there and I put the pen to paper and I just did it, and I sat down and I was like, okay, I'm going to do an hour of it every night and I'm going to get this thing done, and then ultimately scrap it and redo it. But the fact is, I still put it out there and did it, and it was something that was not what you would expect from a comic book, because even in particular, I know in my initial, when I tell people that, I'd like, I write comics, illustrate them, things like that, and they're like, do you do the Spiderman? Is that Batman? Is it? And I'm like, no, it's it's this indie horror thing about like mysteries and death and everything, and they're like, oh yes, oh no. It's not a superhero. So it's that kind of thing. So just like start anywhere and put the pen to paper, and don't be afraid to put it out there. Like I'm redoing for a third time a book called Sleep, which it's finally now where it should be. I got a little bit too carried away with trying to teach myself to be a colorist the last time. But again, it's not. It's just about putting yourself out there a little bit, and don't be afraid to try it. Find the inspiration from anywhere, and like that, it may start. I was sitting on my bed, and then all of a sudden, goldfish flew in the window. But you can then turn that around and make that relatable. And that's where also that kind of relates to the cliffhanger thing of like, okay, so we're about to finally get to the point where how did the goldfish actually fly? Issue 2. Thank you.
Like a TikTok, like part 2.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I guess we can end it there.